Hello, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. Before we get in the show today, please remember to like and follow. And if you have any live questions, be sure to use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. So, we had a packed weekend as far as the NFL playoffs. I know that the opening wildcard round was possibly a little disappointing for some, but I thought that for the most part, other than one dominant performance that was somewhat expected, we had a slate of really good football games. So today we are going to be getting into those. We'll be starting off with last night's headliner game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. We'll then be getting into the 49ers coming back to defeat the Green Bay Packers. We will then be covering the sneaky close game between the Detroit Lions and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then rounding out the show with the Baltimore Ravens' dominant performance over the Texans. So to start off with this Chiefs game, they come into Buffalo, into Orchard Park, and upset the Bills 27-24. It really felt like, in a lot of senses, that this was the chance that the Bills had to finally get over this hump. The Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen rivalry has a lot of the time been compared to that of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, and similar to that rivalry, it seemed like after a few years of Tom Brady dominating, the Patriots dynasty wasn't quite as strong, and it opened up the opportunity for Peyton Manning and the Colts at the time to take over, and that is still to be seen here as the Kansas City Chiefs come up on top again, now 3-0 against Josh Allen in the Bills in the postseason. So diving into this game, as it says on the screen, 27-24. Both of the offenses were incredible to start this game. The offenses scored on the first 9 of 10 true drives through the third quarter. If you take out the Chiefs kneeling to end out the first half, and then it was the Chiefs driving 75 yards to score right at the beginning of the fourth quarter. They go down the field 75 yards. Pacheco punches it in for them, makes it 27-24, and that's where the score would stay for the remainder of the game. I think that you have to give credit to the Chiefs defense, because as high-paced as the offense was to start that game, the Chiefs defense, which was seen to be an elite unit, really stepped up. They were getting pushed around a lot. Tony Romo in the booth was very worried for them at one point, where on the offensive line, they were just getting tons of push. And I will say the one area that we talked about on Friday of how this Chiefs defense can be vulnerable is through the run game. James Cook looked great, very efficient through the first 2 or so quarters there. Josh Allen was running all over the place. Didn't help that the Chiefs linebacker Willie Gay was ruled out with a neck injury to start that second half. The Chiefs sort of game planned for him being a quarterback spy of sorts to help keep an extra eye on Josh Allen in the running game, but he quickly leaves the game in the first half, and Josh Allen was really getting what he wanted. Both offenses were as a whole, but it was the Chiefs defense that eventually stepped up and took over for them, really shutting down the run game specifically. And I think that the other big thing that they did was the fact that they were able to eliminate the downfield, deep, explosive plays from the Bills offense. If you remember, even going back to last year when the Bills exited in this same weekend against the Cincinnati Bengals, a lot of the talk was about how they seem to be so reliant on the home run hitting plays, and if you just drop those safeties back and make the Bills strategically methodically drive down the field on you, they were not going to have as much success. And I do think that even when they were humming on offense, they weren't getting those explosive plays. They were getting the push up front. And once they lost that factor, it really hindered their ability to move the ball and be this elite group. That being said, the Bills did still have a chance. They had the ball at the end of the game with a chance to win. Not quite the end of the game, but late in the fourth quarter, where they drive down the field 50 or so yards, and definitely saw there was a little bit of an aspect, I feel like, of at least me watching the game, watching with my family. Couldn't help but talk about that 13 seconds game that took place a couple years ago when the Bills supposedly scored too soon, left too much time on the clock despite it being only 13 seconds, and Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, when their offense was truly at their peak too, was able to drive down the field in just 2 plays, kick a field goal to send that game to overtime, and then they walk it off then. So it seemed like there was a little bit of at least that energy sort of resonating around the game of, okay, the Chiefs have the ball now with a chance to take the lead. How are they going to manage this clock situation? Because they got the ball back with 8 or so minutes. Maybe it was a little less than that, but it was around that. It would have been asking a lot to sort of have it all, where at this point they are down by just 3 points. So yes, a field goal keeps them alive, but you don't really want to give the Chiefs any chance to get the ball back, whether you are tied or leading, with the threat of that playoff game a couple of years ago sort of coming back to haunt them once again. So I just thought that it looked very conservative from them at times, and they drive down the field 50 yards and ultimately stall out on the Chiefs' 26-yard line. And that is before Tyler Bass, who has been pretty good for them all year, their kicker, misses the 44-yard field goal, and the Chiefs get the ball back, are able to pick up enough first downs to run that clock out, kneel the game, and it is over. So for the Bills here, you can look at it a couple ways, because a lot of people are going to look straight towards Tyler Bass, their kicker, for the missed field goal. It's always really dirty, almost, the way that this plays out. He deleted his social media accounts because that's what happens, especially when you're positioned like a kicker, where the highs and the chances to be great are so few that when you make those mistakes, everybody sort of comes for your neck. It's a really dirty thing that goes on in sports, and that is the case. But really, it shouldn't have come down to a kick in the first place, in my opinion. Like I mentioned, they couldn't connect on their deep shots. They had a couple opportunities late within their last 2 drives to sort of break that trend. There were a couple pretty accurate, good deep balls from Josh Allen looking downfield. There was one for Trent Sherfield where he initially had it, but as he's going towards the ground, he just can't keep his arms and his hands under him, and so that falls incomplete. That was their second last drive. That was on 3rd down, so they end up having to punt that. And then the final drive, Josh Allen with an absolute missile downfield to Stephon Diggs, and definitely a difficult play when you're Diggs. Obviously, it's easy for us from the couch to just be sitting there and say, oh, well, how can you not catch that? It goes through his arms, but again, especially on such a deep play, yes, when you're Stephon Diggs and you have the reputation that you do, and not for nothing, you talk as much as you do, I think that he's actually been a lot better. Granted, the performance hasn't been there, hasn't had an 100-yard game since October, I believe it is, but he's sort of learned to control his emotions a little more, I feel like, during the course of the year, because Diggs was somebody that early in the year, there was some drama going on between him and the team, and I think even going back to Minnesota, there was a little bit of something, but he was able to reel it in, and it could have gotten messy the way that the Bills started the season. But all that to be said, hard play to make, but when you're Stephon Diggs, you kind of have to convert on that, especially because it's a harder throw than it is a catch. So they can't get that. There was the fake punt decision, which ultimately doesn't come back to really hurt them. I think that Sean McDermott could be in a little bit more under fire if it weren't for the fact that the Chiefs didn't score off of that, because you didn't see it was fourth down. They were on their own side of the ball. This is early in the fourth quarter. They try a fake punt run. Now Tony Romo seems pretty adamant that it was the right decision because the Chiefs only had 10 defenders on the field. And I think that I personally didn't agree with it. I don't know. I just feel like when you are, yes, your defense isn't really getting a ton done, but giving the Chiefs a short field is a terrible decision in my opinion. That being said, Mecole Hardman ends up fumbling out of bounds, so that doesn't come back to hurt them, sort of shields Sean McDermott for that decision, but that was definitely a risky one. And just their defense as a whole was never able to step up and take control of that game, whereas the Chiefs defense did, in my opinion. Now, they were dealing with tons of injuries going into the game itself, losing Bernard last week. They've been playing without Matt Milano and Tre'Davious White for a lot of the season, but they were just getting pushed around, allowed 7.7 yards per play. It's really hard to win playoff football games like that. So I guess ultimately when you look at this for the Bills, you do have to sort of feel bad for Josh Allen, because I thought that he did play really well throughout the game. Now, that being said, just because of the coming up short at the end of that game with a chance to take the lead and them not converting, I think that there are going to be questions around him, because that's what happens when you play quarterback in the NFL, is you have a lot of attention, either good or bad. You are blamed for just about everything. And there were a handful of cases this year where Josh Allen wasn't really great towards the end of games. There was that overtime game against the Eagles. I know that they won the regular season game against the Chiefs, but really, when you look at it, they got stalled in the red zone once again, just like they did prior in that week against the Eagles. And he got put under pressure, made some bad throws, some poor decisions, and I wouldn't fully put it on him like that. I don't think it's fully equivalent, but that is what's going to happen, again, when you are in that position of being a star quarterback on a playoff team. So we'll be getting more to the Bills as the week goes on, I'm sure as well. But on the Chiefs side of this, you do have to give them credit, because this was a very good game, very back and forth between the lead changes that they probably said a million times on the broadcast. But their offense easily looks the best that they have all year. This is a group that we were really worrying about for a while, but they've seemed to somewhat round a corner here, where Travis Kelce, who was quiet for months, he's sort of come out of hibernation. He had 5 catches, 75 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rashee Rice, we were talking about the receivers for a while, and they don't have that number one guy. I think Rashee Rice has been great. He didn't have the most outstanding numbers yesterday, but there are just certain things where he was getting involved in the red zone, had a nice screen catch that he brought down to easy Pacheco territory late in that game for the ultimately game-winning touchdown. I thought that he had a really nice play on third down in the second quarter, where it was third down. He runs sort of in a stick option route to the left side, and he just did a really good job of parking himself. Again, this is a rookie we're talking about, playing with the greatest quarterback of this generation. I'm not ready to go all-time stuff yet, but of this current generation, and makes a really nice catch, sits in between the 2 defenders, and then goes up and jumps up for the ball, brings it down, makes a nice catch, helps lead that drive further to go on to score there. So I think that ultimately this Chiefs offense that we had a lot of questions with is finally starting to rear its head. Now it's going to have a very tough test next week against the Baltimore Ravens. So it's going to be taken to another level, but Mahomes wins his first true road playoff game, and the Chiefs continue to keep moving along. So that is it for the Chiefs-Bills talk. We will be back on the other side of this break talking about the other night game from this playoff game, another one of the big markets, the 49ers and the Packers. So we will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just recapped the Kansas City Chiefs win over the Buffalo Bills, and now moving on to another one of the really good playoff games of the weekend, the 49ers versus the Packers, where they were able to come back and put together a game-winning touchdown drive to steal that one from the Packers 24-21. And I say that they stole that one because in my opinion, I think that the Packers played better for the majority of the game realistically. I thought that on the 49ers side of this, losing Deebo Samuel early in that game obviously really hurt them. And I thought it was a really good point by Greg Olsen on the broadcast, talking about the fact that it is difficult when you are a playoff team that especially has a bye week. You are game planning for 2 weeks, and within the first set of plays, you lose your number one receiving threat after expecting him to be a big part of your offense. That is a very difficult thing to overcome. And it definitely looked like Brock Purdy was struggling to sort of come to terms with that. I thought he looked uncomfortable for the majority of the game. Started early in the first quarter with all of the conversation around whether or not he should be wearing the glove on his throwing hand. He started the game with them, but then took them off. I don't know if maybe he saw that almost early interception that he had and said, no, I'm good on this. I like Brock Purdy a lot. I'm about to say some negative things about him. I want to make it clear that I think that he's been put in, yes, a great situation as far as the talent around him, but he also has a lot of expectations surrounding him, and there's very little room for error when you play for a franchise like the San Francisco 49ers and so many eyes are on you. So, all of that being said, I didn't think Purdy was very good. If you actually look at his final stats from the game, they are solid enough. He was 23 for 39, 252 yards, 1 touchdown, and no interceptions. But I already sort of mentioned, I thought that he had a couple passes that could have been intercepted. He had, in my opinion, one of the worst throws we've seen in the playoffs so far this year on their first drive, where he just badly misses on an undercut, and Darnell Savage on that first drive that they had both of his hands right on the ball. Now it was rainy, and I think that when you talk about the weather, it is sort of the conversation surrounding Brock Purdy here, because he was in large part an MVP candidate through the end of the year, but there were a couple points where that discourse was shaken. Now, the one that sort of put the grave in it, put the stamp on it to end those talks with Brock Purdy was the game against the 49ers later in the season, where on primetime football, they got demolished against the Ravens. That one really hurt them, hurt him specifically in terms of MVP talks. And then it was earlier in the year, after starting the season really strong, they had that game where Trent Williams went down, Christian McCaffrey went down in the game. I think it was the same game Deebo Samuel was lost as well. So all kinds of injuries in the rain in Cleveland, playing a backup quarterback. And again, Brock Purdy, it was almost similar, was really struggling to get an efficient offense going for a lot of that game, but he at least was, at the end of the game, able to put together a drive to at least put them in position to win. Now, Jake Moody misses that field goal, and a lot of people held it over Purdy, and it was a bad performance on the day as a whole. But that being said, sort of like what happened in this past game, I don't think that he really got the credit for at least being able to overcome some of the odds, what happened during the game, and he made the right plays. He did enough to put his team in position to win. Now, that did not happen against Cleveland. He was able to lead the game-winning drive in this game, but I thought that his accuracy looked off for a lot of this game, and it wasn't obviously all bad. Like, he comes out and he does put together this game-winning touchdown drive. I thought that there were a handful of instances where he was able to throw through pressure. He made, obviously, that great throw on the run to George Kittle for a 30-yard touchdown. So he did have his moments, but all in all, just the 49ers team as a whole just looked sloppy, I think, on offense. And again, you can point to Deebo, you can point to the weather, but I truthfully don't think that if you look at their play as a whole, they truly deserve to win. I thought the Packers were better, but obviously that doesn't happen. So where did it go wrong here for the Packers? I thought that Jordan Love, who was really having a moment through the second half of the season, playing really well, best QBR since week 11, I believe was the stat. And he was really good, obviously, against the Cowboys, put them ahead significantly that game, although the scoreboard might have made it look a little closer. They had full control of that game because of how good Jordan Love looked. And I thought that, forget the receiver on this exact play, but he had an amazing throw running away from traffic and hitting one of his receivers on the sideline at one point. I thought that he looked really good. He looked really comfortable for a lot of that game. But as that game started to tighten up, it seemed like he did as well. He had the interception in the third quarter where it was third down anyways, so, sort of have to take a shot, but that's not even the issue. It wasn't the decision making, it was the accuracy. And the rain, again, on and off, was heavy in the beginning of the game, picked up a lot in the fourth quarter and such, but just throws it high and behind his rookie tight end Tucker Kraft on third down. That's intercepted by Dre Greenlaw, Dre Greenlaw, quick side note, I don't think he gets enough credit. Maybe that's going to change a little bit as the 49ers ramp up closer to the Super Bowl, but Fred Warner gets a lot of the attention, which I think is deservedly so. I think that Fred Warner is just about the best player on defense in the NFL. I wouldn't look at you like you're crazy if you said that he was the best player in the NFL, period. I think he is an absolute monster. But Dre Greenlaw kind of gets overshadowed a little bit because of that. And I think that it's just wild how the 49ers always have this elite linebacking group. It really does amaze me. But back to the task at hand with the Packers here. Jordan Love has that interception. And then on the final drive, after Brock Purdy leads the 49ers down for their go-ahead touchdown, he just gets erratic. And you know what? It happens with young quarterbacks. It especially happens, I think, with young, talented quarterbacks, because it's almost hard to reel yourself back in at times when you know how much arm talent you have. But this was just a terrible decision by Jordan Love, scrambling out to the right, throwing across his body in this bad weather into the middle of the field, and another Dre Greenlaw interception. Really, really ballsy move by Dre Greenlaw to run around as long as he did. You can try and make the argument he was trying to kill clock. You can try and make the argument, there was some jokes on Twitter about how he was trying to help the 49ers cover the 9.5-point spread. But one way or another, really bad interception by Jordan Love. And just sort of a tough way to go out in the postgame. He called it the mortal sin, which is sort of exactly what it is. Everybody talks about that's the one sort of play you can't make, is throwing across your body to the middle of the field. And he gets burned for it in the biggest spot this season. So it's a tough one. The Packers just left too many chances on the field. They had those missed interceptions that I sort of alluded to for Brock Purdy earlier. I didn't highlight. They had another one where the 49ers were backed up in their own territory and it was third down, and Purdy tried to throw out to Juwan Jennings on the right side. He threw it high, and Keyshawn Nixon had a chance to intercept it. He couldn't bring it in. It looked like if he didn't touch it, there was maybe even a chance that one of his other defenders were in position to make a play. So Purdy got away with a couple shaky throws there, of course, throughout this game, and Packers aren't able to come up there. They had 0 touchdowns in their first 3 red zone appearances, and if you go back a little bit to the Lions-Rams game from Wild Card Weekend, that was what determined that game, was field goals versus touchdowns. It's a massive thing. I think that it was ultimately what sort of swung the game in the Chiefs' direction. I know that they fumbled out the back of the end zone that one play, but the Chiefs had been a bad red zone touchdown team for a lot of the year, and they were sort of able to amend that, at least in moments where they needed to, against the Bills last week. I was worried that was going to be why they fell short, as they couldn't get it done in the red zone. They could. That's me going back to the Chiefs game right now. But Packers struggled with that as well. And obviously then it comes down to another situation where you look at the kicker situation, and Anders Carlson, with a few minutes left in that game, he misses a 41-yard field goal that would have changed the dynamics of this game, because the 49ers touchdown would have been just to tie the game versus take the lead. You likely have Jordan Love not playing, so with his head on fire as much, knowing that instead of needing to make a play, you can at least, survive to overtime and such. So definitely changes the dynamic there, leaving points on the board for sure. So, I mean, this Packers team, there's a lot to be excited about if you are a Packers fan, because this was, I don't have the exact year off the top of my head, but one of the youngest teams to make the playoffs in years, one of the youngest teams, if not the youngest, in the league as a whole this season. So there's a lot to sort of come away with this, some moral victories and such. But I do feel like if you are a Packers fan sitting here this morning, there's probably a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth, knowing that you probably should have won that game. And, it's not like Super Bowl expectations were ever really on the table for this team, but I do think that there's got to be some sort of just groaning, this internal frustration about the opportunities that they left on the field, and that they are going to be sitting at home this weekend as opposed to going on to have the chance to spoil your division rival's big moment and actually advance to a Super Bowl the year after losing your generational quarterback talent in Aaron Rodgers. So that is the 49ers and Packers game. We will be back on the other side of the break talking about the Detroit Lions and their matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Remember, for any live questions that you may have, be sure to use the link at the bottom to get your questions in, to help donate. It helps us a lot. You can use the link streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network /tip. So moving on here to our third segment in the third playoff game from this weekend, we have the Detroit Lions advancing to their first NFC Championship game since 1991. It's been a long time coming for these Lions, and sort of actually a little bit of an interesting dynamic. I think that America as a whole, we're all rooting for the Lions fans and the story of it all. Dan Campbell is an electric leader of men. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. Jared Goff having an awesome redemption arc. They have one of the most fun rookie classes to watch in some time that I have seen, between Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Jack Campbell, Brian Branch, those prior to on the defensive end. I think that they're a very fun team to watch. Now, there's a little bit of talking going on between the likes of CJ Gardner-Johnson, who has been a known trash talker for some time. There was a little bit of after the whistle type stuff in their last game against the Buccaneers that was a little bit questionable in my opinion. I still think that for the storyline as a whole, I'm all for it, but there is a slight level of, kind of seems like some players on that team need to be humbled a little bit. But obviously at this point in the game, I'm a Patriots fan. I have no real stakes in who comes out on top of this season. I think that, these playoffs, I'm glad that they've taken the turn that they have. I feel like a lot of people overreact a lot of the time anyways, because let's face it, the wild card round a lot of the time can be a bit disappointing, especially after the introduction of the 7 seeds have been a little bit uneven matchups a lot of the times, but the Packers obviously beat the Cowboys, and no, it wasn't a competitive game, but it was unexpected and it was a lot of fun. So I'll just say that. But this Lions versus Buccaneers game, I think that it is a really great story, as I sort of alluded to with the Lions. Now, I think that they weren't getting quite as much respect as they probably earned during the regular season. A lot of people had them below the 49ers, below the Cowboys, below even the Eagles. And I can understand why, because you see that logo. I feel like I'm a little bit of a sucker for it sometimes. Seeing the logo and just not really trusting it to come up in big moments. That's why I didn't like the Cowboys this year. And it happened. So I can see that, it's Jared Goff, who has been very good for his tenure here in Detroit, but he definitely had a little bit of a stretch during the regular season where he wasn't great. He was turning the ball over. The offense was starting slow, and especially with this defense that they have. Now, I mentioned some key players. There's Aleem McNeil on the front line. I really like Derek Barnes as a linebacker. I think that they have some individual guys. Aiden Hutchinson, I didn't even mention. He was a monster in this Buccaneers game, but also in part due to the Buccaneers sort of hurting themselves, which we will get into. The secondary really hasn't been great for them all year, and they've been struggling to get stops. And sort of as a result, it's like, okay, if their offense is not going to carry them, how are they supposed to win games? And that was almost the case in this past week. I thought that both offenses started a little bit slower than maybe we were expecting, but the Lions were able to get it together. Now, I do think a lot of this game was in part the Buccaneers sort of not stepping up enough. I thought that it's not that they were outmanned on the front line, but the lack of communication. I mean, the Lions had free runners coming for Baker Mayfield all day. I thought Baker was pretty great for the majority of it. I know that it's also very easy, sort of like we talked about with Jordan Love, but even less so. It's easy to point at somebody with the interception in the crucial time and say that he wasn't great. And you can look at the box score and simply just look at, oh, well, everybody throws against the Lions. No, Baker Mayfield had very little help. The front seven of Detroit was all over him for the majority of the day. I thought he did an incredible job of running away from pressure, still being able to make big-time throws on the run in the face of defenders. I thought he was very good. But that being said, the Lions defense here, we'll see how sustainable it is come next week against a much more, I mean, I don't know, because the Buccaneers are such a weird situation where Todd Bowles called them a Super Bowl contender last season. I don't know if that was really true. Yeah, you have Tom Brady, but they were sub 500. Yes, they made the playoffs, but it wasn't pretty for them as far as, the way that their game shook out last year. Now, they got a much better run game this year. Rachaad White had a really good season, just over 1,000 years. So I think that ultimately when you look at this team versus last year, I know it's easy to sort of make the comparisons between Baker this season and Tom Brady last season. I don't think it's fully true. But on that note, going to our comment section here, whether or not Baker will get a contract next year, I think he will. I think that the Buccaneers and him should have mutual interest for bringing this back. Now, there's a little bit of a question of, was this just sort of magic in a bottle? But you look at that division, it's still wide open. And I think that, yes, they don't really seem like they have plans to bring back Mike Evans as of now. He's an upcoming free agent, so it's going to be interesting there, but they still have Chris Godwin. I thought that Baker developed a really good relationship with a couple things. Again, I know that his offensive line didn't really do him many favors in the playoff game, but there's just, I don't know, maybe I'm like too full of the storylines and everything, but it seems like he and his offensive line got along really well. He would take them out for dinners and such, and he would pay for their stuff. Him and Tristan Wirfs, his left tackle, who Wirfs, if you remember, he came in the league as a first-round draft pick in 2020, given the role of you have to protect Tom Brady, this older version of Tom Brady, 6 Super Bowls Tom Brady. You have to be his main guy, and I think that Wirfs has been really amazing for them through this stretch. I think that Baker has just developed some really nice relationships. I think that him and Cade Otton, their tight end, I think that Otton has really come along this season as well. So I think that they should be looking to bring Baker back. I'm curious what the number would be necessarily that he's looking for, but I also think that Baker has sort of gotten the short end of the stick through his stretch of the end of his Browns career after winning them their first playoff game in years and then playing through an injury in his final season. They just sort of dump him, ends up with the Panthers, and we've seen how the Panthers have been as a franchise the past couple seasons. He has seemed to rejuvenate a little bit, and I easily think he can be a top 16 quarterback in the league, and I would not be in any rush if I'm the Buccaneers to send him on his way. Again, that exact number maybe makes things more complicated, but I think it's in their best interest. Wrapping up here on the Lions, I think that they did a very good job of sort of overcoming that slow start on offense. Their defense did enough to hold up, again, whether that be the Tampa Bay front not doing enough, but Brian Branch I thought was great. Aiden Hutchinson, like I mentioned, he is a monster, and they were patient. Now, I wish they would feed Jahmyr Gibbs more. I like what they do with the 2 running back set where they sort of go drive for drive. We saw that at the beginning of their game last week in their win, and it worked out well. That's sort of like a yin and yang thing where David Montgomery's a lot more power. Gibbs has the speed, but I thought Gibbs was phenomenal. Only 9 carries, but 74 yards, touchdown, had 40 receiving yards as well, and then he had that big 31-yard touchdown where he broke out. I think he has great vision, and then that on that touchdown specifically, that one-on-one speed to get on the outside of an all-pro safety in Antoine Winfield Jr. and break away for the touchdown. So I wish they would feed him a little bit more. But again, this Lions team is a lot of fun. Just play style alone, I like watching them. I think they're aesthetically pleasing, like their jerseys too. I just think that they're a very easy team to sort of buy into and to root for. And especially with all the baggage of Detroit weighing on them, I think that they have answered the call, and they are in now a position to sort of make history for the city there, led behind Dan Campbell, who, little bit of a madman, but I'm all for it. I think that going back to his Hard Knocks appearance before last season, this has just been such a fun storyline to follow along with, and they are going into next week as underdogs against the 49ers, but I do think that they have a real chance. So we will obviously get more into that matchup specifically as the week moves on, but for now we are going to be taking a break, and in the final segment we're going to be touching on the last game between the Baltimore Ravens and the Houston Texans, so stick around. Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Going into our final segment here between the Baltimore Ravens and the Houston Texans. Remember to get your questions in the stream, and feel free to use the link streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip to help prioritize your question and leave tips. It helps us out a lot. And be sure to like and follow the show as well. So moving into this last segment here, the Baltimore Ravens with just a dominant game against the Houston Texans this week. And this is a real scary Super Bowl contender, in my opinion. I think that they've been on an incredible run down the stretch of the year, and they have answered the call every single time. They've had a few really huge statement wins, and I feel like they've gotten their love at times, of course, but I think that there's also been this question surrounding them the whole time. Let's see Lamar do it down the stretch of the year and in the playoffs. Fair or not, that's sort of been with them due to the fact that Lamar Jackson in his first couple seasons was a little disappointing in the playoffs. They, of course, get upset by the Titans a couple years ago when the Titans were really the underdog story, and then the Titans came out in the AFC Championship game and really didn't ever look too much of a threat to, I believe it was when they were playing the Chiefs. And we just sort of questioned the Lamar Jackson-led offense. And here's the thing is, I do think that's fair, because if you look at Lamar Jackson the last time he was in the playoffs versus right now, I think there's a tremendous difference in his ability. I think he has developed so much as a passer since then, and nobody really gives that perspective when talking about, oh, he has these playoff problems. Well, he missed the second half of back-to-back seasons going into this year. And there was almost a little bit of concern in that alone because there was a potential that he could play, but I think very fairly, he didn't have a contract, and given how he plays while running the ball so much, it sort of leaves a lot of risk. I mean, I think especially earlier in his career, he's gotten better at avoiding the big hits, but it was absolutely a part of his play to start his career, and since then, he's matured in so many ways, whether it be the passing ability itself or also the awareness that he means so much to the franchise and he can't be taking these massive hits play after play. So again, these concerns have been fair in the past, but I think he's really ready to step up in these moments. I thought that he was great against the Texans, and we are talking about the Texans, obviously a much younger team, rookie head coach, rookie quarterback. So they had overachieved in a lot of points to even get to the second round matchup against the Ravens. And although their offense started a little slow, I was never too worried about it. I thought that really their fronts on both ends, offensive line and their defensive front seven, dominated Houston, and that was a huge reason why this game went the way that it did. Because on one hand, you have a Lamar Jackson that, as we've established, has always been good with his legs, and on the other side, well, so you have Lamar Jackson, who's always been good with his legs, and then you give him the time to scan the field, look downfield, make the throws, but also have the awareness to take those running lanes still when he needed to. And it happened a few times where I think that he still is sometimes more comfortable running than he is throwing, but he also, I think, in large part has just improved that much as an arm threat, that he's got this dual threat ability that is a nightmare for opposing defenses. On the other end, I had the Ravens defense as the number one offense or defense remaining in the playoffs going into last weekend. Now, again, very young team with the Houston Texans. Next week, they're going to be going up against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. It's going to be a different level of a test, of course, but they absolutely showed up. I mean, there was no sense of a running game from the Texans all day. They were getting the Texans in down and distance situations, and I didn't think CJ Stroud was bad at all, but just with how limited that offense really became, I think that if you weren't really tuning into the Texans a lot throughout the course of the season, their rookie receiver, Tank Dell, was phenomenal for them during the year, but they lost him about 3 quarters or so through the season, and it really made an impact. It was just sort of left down to Nico Collins, who I like a lot, but it's just tough to rely on just that. I like Dalton Schultz too, but just all in all, the Texans really didn't have too many weapons, especially once their run game was shut down. And I do want to give credit, because when I made that statement that I think that the Ravens defense is the best unit, I didn't even realize they were going to be missing Marlon Humphrey, their number one cornerback, in this game. But Ronald Darby, who has had really good moments in the league, but he's on the older end, he's been passed around a little bit, I thought he was great shutting down Nico Collins. That was the one guy, cannot let him beat us. And I just thought it was such a well-rounded performance, really, from top to bottom with this defense. Roquan Smith, he's an animal. He has been, in my opinion, outside of Christian McCaffrey. I mean, last year in the last NFL season, I thought there were a handful of actually very effective trade deadline acquisitions. But between Christian McCaffrey and Roquan Smith specifically, those are easily the top two impact players that were traded mid-season. In my opinion, he's been so good for them. Justin Madubuike on that front line. If you don't know the name, learn it because he's phenomenal. And then Jadeveon Clowney, too, had a few huge plays in the backfield. Former number 1 overall pick. And he's bounced around, but he seems to have found a home here in Baltimore. I think that, they were the ones that really stood out. But give credit to Kyle Hamilton, who in my opinion is the best safety in the league. Patrick Queen is an absolute baller himself, too. They just have so many guys on this defense. Geno Stone, a young guy that has come in and has played really impactful football for them. I think that if there is going to be a group that can sort of get Patrick Mahomes off of his game, this is the one. And then we'll get more into really the preview of that AFC Championship game as the week goes on. But I think that this running offense that the Baltimore Ravens have should be a very scary sight for the Kansas City Chiefs. You saw late in the game, and, the Ravens had it wrapped up for the majority of the game anyways, but they start bringing in Dalvin Cook, and he looked good. And, Dalvin Cook, he was bad with the Jets. The Jets obviously had nobody blocking for him. Dalvin Cook signed with the Ravens right before the playoffs started, was elevated from the practice squad. So I don't know if I'm putting too much stock into some garbage time runs from him, but I also think that it adds to the statement of how good this Todd Monken-led offense has been for them, where they are just such an elite running group. Talked about it last week. 15 more rush yards per game than any other team in the NFL this season. Yes, that is partially due to the fact that they were winning so many games that they were just trying to keep it on the ground. And the concern comes is, can Lamar throw them back into a game? But I don't think the Chiefs are going to really come out and significantly take that lead where it just eliminates even the possibility of the Ravens running the ball. The Chiefs can be beat on the ground, and this is a group where from Lamar Jackson or anybody else that they have in that backfield, whether it be Cook, Justice Hill, Edwards, the Ravens lost their number 1 option coming into the year with J.K. Dobbins, and then Keaton Mitchell, the rookie, tears his ACL halfway through the year after really coming on for them, and they just haven't really missed a beat at all. I think that they have the most talented receiver they ever had in Lamar Jackson's time here in Baltimore with Zay Flowers. He's great. And OBJ is, he's not, of course, the OBJ that was in the Giants organization, but he made impactful plays for the Rams in that playoff run after, still dealing with a lot of these similar injuries. And I think that he's a very calming presence. We'll see if Mark Andrews is going to be returning for them next week. He has returned to practice some, but he also has, it was a very serious injury that he went down with. He was ruled out pretty early prior to that to that Texans game earlier this week. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. But the Ravens open as 3.5-point favorites over the Chiefs. I think that's probably the right number. And I picked the Chiefs last week against the Bills, where they were getting a very similar number. The way that the Ravens play, I don't know if I could take that number with the Chiefs yet, because I do think that there's a very strong chance that the Ravens could just run the ball straight down the Chiefs' throat and really just beat them up. But we will continue to touch on that subject as well as all things going on in sports as the week progresses. That is all we have for today. Thank you very much for joining the GSMC Sports Podcast. We will be back now starting every day, 2 to 3 o'clock live on all streaming services. So please feel free to stop by, Please like and subscribe, and we will be back tomorrow. Thank you very much for tuning in.